now is Florida Senator Marco Rubio, Vice Chair of Senate Intel. Senator, over the weekend, Putin ordered his nuclear forces to be on high alert, and Biden was asked about this today. Watch.
Mr. President, should Americans be worried about nuclear war?
No.
Senator, it's a confident and quick no from President Biden. Should he be this confident, given how precarious things seem on the ground in Ukraine tonight?
Well, I don't think there's any reason to panic people that are watching the show that we're on the verge of a nuclear exchange of ICBMs. But I do think it's bear watching, and this is my personal view based on everything. This is not the same Putin as 5 or 10 years ago, right? This is a guy whose entire legitimacy in Russia is built on his argument that, the 90s were an era of humiliation. He restored Russia to great global power status. And now he's facing the free fall of his economy. I mean, what's facing Russia's economy over the next 10 days is cataclysmic. And then you add to that the humiliation on the battlefield that they have faced so far, even though they're keeping much of that from the Russian public. And you see a guy who's facing some circumstances that he needs to reverse pretty quickly. He needs to reestablish some level of power balance with the West before he can even think about, what else to do. And he doesn't have a lot of tools to do it, except cyber, maybe some space warfare, ratcheting up whatever monstrosity he's going to commit in Ukraine, and tactical battlefield nuclear weapons. It is part of Russia's military doctrine to escalate in order to de-escalate by using tactical nuclear weapons. I'm not arguing that they're on the verge of doing that. I'm just saying that with a guy in that condition, with that mindset in charge, you're going to get a different decision from him today than you would have 10 years ago. And it's just something we need to keep an eye on.
Senator Rubio, I know you just got out of an intel briefing not long ago. There's a lot of stuff you can't tell us tonight. But what can you share about this conflict, the European involvement in trying to isolate Putin, and the assistance, which you've been so dead on about, of China in all of this, and the cover that China has given to Vladimir Putin on the finance side?
Yeah, well, he never would have done this had he not felt that China, to some extent, would be there to help buffer the pain of it. There's no doubt about it. In fact, he moved a bunch of troops from the far east of Russia, something they'd never done before, because, as you know, China claims Siberia belongs to them. So there's always been a strong Russian military presence there. He pulled a lot of that towards Belarus and towards this engagement. But I would add, look, nobody knows what happens here next, but some things are becoming pretty obvious, and you can see it from the commercial imagery you're talking about here tonight. It's pretty clear now that what's happening is a massive Russian force is pushing in from the north. They're going to try to take the western part of Kyiv. And the reason being that all these supplies that we keep talking about, everything that we're providing and other countries are providing, it has to come over from the west. So if they can cut Kyiv off of those supplies, it begins to really deteriorate the city's standing. And then obviously you have this other two forces that are pushing in from the northeast. Eventually they'll try to take the east. And once they've got Kyiv encircled, then I think you're going to see a medieval type siege. And that means, people starving. They're hoping the government will collapse or surrender or capitulate. And then they can install some sort of puppet government, which has been his goal the whole time. So that's clearly the aim they have. Obviously, the Ukrainians have fought a lot harder and more effectively than we anticipated. Their spirits are very high. So they still have a chance to disrupt this. But this is clearly what they're planning to do. And as you've seen from the imagery being shown on Fox News and other places, what they're bringing down from the north is a massive, massive show of force.
Yeah. Senator, one of your Democrat colleagues, Chris Murphy, just tweeted that DOD and DHS are pressing hard for Congress to end the continuing resolution and get a budget passed. There's no way for our national security agencies to be nimble enough to support Ukraine if they're operating on a 2020-2021 budget. Senator, while all of us are very, very concerned about Ukraine and the security situation on the ground there, the question also is, money for what exactly, and how will that specifically be used, including by a military leadership that had trouble getting out of Afghanistan?
Yeah, so look, it's true that in the ideal world we do have an appropriations bill for the year, because what that allows you to do is programming. It allows you to spend money on things that you've authorized them to build, like, for example, how are we going to counter hypersonics and things of that nature, and you need programmatic money to do that. That's true. That said, that's not an impediment. For example, we could today, instead of voting on this abortion on demand bill that they put up on the floor, we could be moving right now for some sort of supplemental funding if they wanted to provide more weapons to the Ukrainian fighters. In fact, the president has the authority to provide quite a bit of that now. So the fact of the matter is that we're not doing it because they didn't bring it to the floor. If they wanted to, they could do that. And I think you'd find a lot of support in Congress for spending that involves things like providing them more of the things you're seeing on television, right? The things that blow up tanks, the munitions that bring down airplanes and provide some air cover. So yes, it's ideal to have an appropriations bill. Everybody would agree.
Senator,
but that's not an impediment to doing what we need to do.
But Senator, as a follow-on to that, again, as you pointed out, I think better than most anyone in the Senate, without China and without the growth of China over the last number of decades, in part because of our pretty poor trade policies, China has grown into our new Cold War threat. I mean, we won the Cold War against Russia only to squander it to China. So if we're going to put sanctions on Russia, isn't it incumbent upon the U.S. Senate to start pulling back on things like normal trade relation status with China and saying, you keep supporting Putin and what's going on, you're next. Tariffs, move forward on 301 investigations. I mean, Russia's economy is the size of Italy's. I mean, right. China's the big dog here, is it not?
No, look, that's a right point. But this is an acute problem that we're facing right now, and it's a very serious one. But the long-term problem, the 100-year problem, the 50-year problem is China. And let me tell you, all these sanctions you've seen imposed on Russia, there's no way you could ever get anyone to impose those on China. Their economy at this point, its tentacles are too big and too deeply ingrained in all of these countries, including our own.
Well, we have to pull back, though, Senator, right? I mean,
isn't
it time to tell American corporations, and I was looking at some of your tweets over the weekend, it's time to start bringing your operations back home, because we're sending money to Ukraine. We're going to help the Ukrainian people. But then China, from the money we waste in China, that's just going to help Vladimir Putin buy energy and all the other stuff. So it's a big circle of disaster that we're in part funding by our trade policy with China.
Well, it's even more dangerous than that. There's a lot of the things that we need to use, both in our technology and everyday life, that we can't possibly use because it's made in China. They control the means of production. The supply chain issue is the single greatest vulnerability this country faces. It was exposed by COVID. It'll really be exposed in the future in some conflict. And look, Russia can't impose economic pain on America. China could, because of how deeply ingrained our corporate class has become in the Chinese model and in the Chinese economy. In fact, they become lobbyists for the Chinese position on a lot of issues. They deputize our corporations to come up here and lobby Congress for China's interests because they're making money in that country and because their factories are over there. We have to pull back from that, or we're going to find ourselves 50 times more vulnerable to China than we ever have been to Russia.
Yeah, every dollar we lose in a trade deficit to China goes right to, in some part, fueling chaos around the world, including in Ukraine. And Senator, you've been terrific on that issue. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks.